Bang!
What's that?
Lazy Money Machine podcast. Graham Brown, Erik ten Haven. You got two of these very nice breaks in the music here. Anyway. Actually, we should bring in our sound effects sometime, yeah? It's time for the sound effects again sometime. Anyway, just goofing around. Graham and I have been recording quite a few podcasts already, and we're happy to do another one. Just having some fun. Hope you guys don't mind. If you do mind, let us know. We will never do it again. But that's for us. This is, I mean, as anything, this for us is really, really, really enjoyable to do, and we'd like to have a bit of fun while we're doing it. So there you go. Lazy Money Machine podcast, talking about lifestyle design, passive income. And as always, we are usually looking for interesting stuff that we found or can find on the internet. And we've got one again today.
Learn to work harder on yourself than you do on your job. Once I got that, it turned my life around. Learn to work harder on yourself than you do on your job. Wow. He said, if you work hard on your job, you'll make a living.
Do you want to say something, Graham?
No, that is so powerful. I've never heard that. I mean, it's Jim Rohn, right?
It's Jim Rohn, yeah. There's more coming, so.
If you work hard on yourself, you can make a fortune. Wow. If you would have known me at age 25, you would have said, Jim Rohn's a hard worker. If you'd have known me, you'd have said that. I'm the guy, I don't mind coming a little bit early, staying a little bit late. I don't mind that. You'd have said, well, Jim Rohn's a hard worker. You say, well, how come he's got pennies in his pocket and nothing in the bank and behind on his promises? Well, I was a hard worker, but I was working hard on my job, not on myself. I'm telling you, if you'll learn that simple little principle and start the process today, latest tomorrow, give you tonight to think it over. And start this whole process of personal development, work on yourself, make yourself more valuable to the marketplace. I'm telling you, you can so dynamically change your income, and economics is the least of the values that you can start earning in terms of equity if you'll start working harder on yourself than you do on your job. Work hard on yourself and develop the skills. Work hard on yourself and develop the graces. All of the stuff necessary to become more valuable to the marketplace. I'm telling you, your whole life can explode into change. Promotions, no problem. Becoming more valuable to the company, I'm telling you, no problem. Money, no problem. Economics, no problem. Future, no problem. If you just go to work on the right thing. Not get things out there to change. Don't try to change the seed. Don't change the soil. Don't change the sunshine. Don't change the rain. Don't change the mix of seasons. Let the miracle of everything that's available work for you, and start working on the inside. Work on your philosophy. Work on your attitude. Work on your personality. Work on your language. Work on the gift of communication. Work on all of your abilities. And if you'll start making those personal changes, I'm telling you, everything will change for you.
Jim Rohn. One thing that I paused in the middle, basically what he says is that work hard on your job and you can make a living. Work hard on yourself and you can make a fortune. And that's such a beautiful expression, I think.
Most people do work very hard in their jobs, don't they?
They do, yes. Which I think as a start is good, right? So
yeah. Well, it means they're not lazy.
Absolutely.
But then to work harder on yourself than you do on your job, I don't think anybody works on them. Well, very few people actually work on themselves, right?
Right.
And maybe the problem is that when they work so hard on their jobs, is they're so depleted at the end of it. There's nothing left over to, if you're working really hard and then you come home, the last thing you want to do is sit down and read a book or start building a business.
But this is also a mindset, right? I mean, if that's the case, you could do it the other way around. You could wake up an hour early and work on yourself while you're still fresh.
Yeah. And one thing we talked about in the last podcast was the whole idea about, having energy to do stuff. And I think that's so important, isn't it? To have the motivation. It's not a mental thing. It's an energy thing, isn't it? It's like when you're tired, you don't have the motivation to do these things. So I think that's the frustration that people feel, isn't it? And this is I see this with people, especially when you go to things like, you start talking in the context of, working out or health or whatever, is that, when you have a lifestyle where you're so tired or so depleted from making so many decisions as well, is that you don't have any decision energy left to make decisions for what's important, right? So, it goes back to something that we've talked about before, decision fatigue, is that, President Obama famously only had 2 colors of suits. He had, I think, navy and dark gray. That was it. And he ate the same things every morning. He had like 2 boiled eggs every breakfast. Yeah. 2 boiled. And you think, this guy's OCD. Well, it's not. It's because they asked him, why do you have the same breakfast every morning? And the reason why, he said, hey, look, I make thousands of decisions every day. And one of those decisions is, do I press that button or not? And you want to make sure that the guy who makes that decision every day is not wasting his decision energy on what am I going to have for breakfast. And this comes back to the whole idea of working.
Do you do that too, Graham, or not? Have you standardized things in your life?
Yes.
What have you standardized?
Just weird, like, for example, what I'm going to eat.
Okay.
Or just in the evening, like, people think, it's a bit OCD, but I always prepare my clothes the night before for the next morning. Because when I wake up, here's the thing, going off track a little bit, but this does come back to the Jim Rohn thing, and I'll come back to that in a minute, is that, so I put my clothes out the night before for the next day, because at the end of the day, I'm sort of, if I'm still able to make those kind of decisions, I'm in surplus. I've got decision energy left, right? So it's fine. It's bonus. I'll spend it. However, in the morning, I don't want to be waking up thinking, what color socks am I going to wear? Or, should I wear these pants or those? Because already it's a small thing. It's an innocuous thing, but it's already taking out of your decision bank account, right? So when you actually come to making really important decisions, you're already tired. So I do that. And I think it's this whole part of, work harder on yourself than you do on your job. That's great. The challenge is having the energy to do that, right?
Yeah. You're right. Yeah, I think.
So how do you have the energy?
Yeah.
That's the challenge.
That's right. Yeah. And, but for that, I think that's the same. I mean, it's maybe a simpler one, but I mean, it's the same with exercise. How many people don't push off putting physical exercise into their schedule because they don't have the time, or they schedule it at the end of the workday, and then either, it gets stuck because they have to do overtime, or they are too tired.
Right.
It's really, I think, about prioritizing and making the time. And even somebody in a normal job, I think, could find time to do this. But you have to exchange something for it. So maybe you don't have lunch with your colleagues for a couple times a week and you go to the gym. Or you don't have lunch with your colleagues and you go and put yourself into an audio program, or you do a couple of modules of an online course you bought. It is possible, but it is really about how you prioritize and how you schedule your time. And that's something I learned from Brendon Bouchard, a guy where I bought a training from and I respect. And he says, you need to put all these things into your schedule, into your calendar. If it's important to you to work on yourself in whatever form, you got to make the time for it, and you got to just block the time and not let anything come in the way of doing it. It's as simple as that, I think.
So how do you do this? Because you invest a lot in training. I know you're always, involved at some point in training, taking on training courses. You spend, these things could be in the thousands, right? So it's not something that's just a curious passing interest to you. How do you make the time then to do that? Because there's always that risk, isn't it, that you buy a course, you spent the money, now you feel like you've done what's necessary, and you never complete the course. So how do you actually discipline yourself to make the time, take the time to do the courses, do the modules?
Yeah. To be honest, there's a few of these courses that I have not completed in total. But what usually happens is there's going to be, I know I need this knowledge for something. I've bought a course on online marketing. Well, for instance, now I know I need this. I know I've bought this. So then when the urgency comes and there's a need for knowing it, then I'll go and just get it done. I'll just go through the course. I'll do all the notes, and I'll make sure that I absorb the content that's there, because now is the urgency is there to actually use it. That's usually what happens. Otherwise, if I'm in a bit of a slower period, I just schedule, like I schedule phone calls and I schedule other work. I just put an hour time in the day to go and spend on my training program that I've bought, and just drop everything else. And just because the key difference for me is that if I attribute that time to be productive time and not just watching a course, I really see that as that's learning and that's important to me. Then I make the time and then I do it. So that's usually how I do it. If I'm going through something on a regular basis, I block the time. But very often I have a few of these things lined up, and then I know, okay, now is the time I need it, and then I go and spend a week on mastering what's being taught.
Right. And do you just have one on your mind at one time, or do you juggle multiple courses? Or?
Never. I always have a bunch and always have 20 books that I read at the same time too.
Right. And that works for you?
Yeah, because I think when you get over the obsession of having to finish something from beginning to end, and stick to the commitment of learning something, that's the key thing, I think. So that's where I don't really mind, browsing through a bunch of books and grabbing, a couple of pages from one book a day. Or a course, because I've got many of these at the same time, but there will always, I'm always convinced there's always a time wherein the urgency will present itself and then you complete it.
I know I don't want to overdo Tim Ferriss, but I want to bring him back in again, maybe because I'm going through a Tim Ferriss binge at the moment. But one thing he said was, don't be afraid to get up halfway through a movie and leave.
Okay.
If it ain't working out for you.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting when you think about that, because it may seem trivial, but there's a very powerful message in it, is that I think a lot of people will stay to the end, and their justification for staying to the end is, well, I'm here now, I'm paid.
I've paid for it.
Sit it out. Yeah. But that applies to so many things, doesn't it? But what he's saying is, look, don't be afraid to leave. And there's two things going on. The first is being afraid. So, you don't want to be the guy getting up and leaving, because people look at you thinking, what's he doing? But also, you've got to remember, value your time.
Yeah.
It's that if something's not working for you, don't do it. Leave it, quit it, do something else.
Mm-hmm.
I think this comes back to this whole idea of working harder on yourself. I think the challenge with this is finding the environment to make that happen, right? Because everybody wants to do it, but something gets in the way. And often what gets in the way is work. Yeah. Ironically, right? But everybody wants to, learn, make themselves better, improve, be fitter, and so on. But, just living gets in the way. And I think, do you remember those Palm Pilots?
Yes.
You remember those things?
Yeah.
Did you have one?
Yeah, I had one.
Right. Okay. Because you were in tech, so you probably had one, right? An interesting thing about those, when those were first advertised in the magazines, there used to be ads, and they would show like the Palm Pilot, and it would show you almost always it was the schedule or the diary that they used to sell these things, right? And it would say something. You'd look at this guy's schedule, and it would say gym, 6 a.m. Right? And it was selling this image that, okay, if you have this thing, then you'll get super organized and you'll be at the gym at 6 a.m. and that's bingo. That's the kind of lifestyle that everybody thinks, oh, yeah, look at me. I'm at 6 a.m. working out before everybody's actually got up and had their breakfast, right? Mm-hmm. But the irony is that nobody ever did that. Very few people actually get up and do that. I mean, there are the kind of people that I hang around with in Ironman who get up at 4:30 in the morning for a 3-hour bike ride.
Yep.
But apart from those crazies, vast majority of people don't do that. And the problem is that they beat themselves up because they say, oh, I got my schedule out and I scheduled in 200 sessions for the next 200 days of gym at 6 a.m. in the morning. It never happened. And I failed after day one, and I start beating myself up and I feel really bad. Mm-hmm. Right. It goes back to that point about not working harder on yourself. They want to, but they fail at it. And the reason why I asked you that question of what works for you is because there's something called cognitive behavioral therapy, which basically says, rather than think about why things happen, just do what works. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? So, for example, if you had a really good day and in that day you achieved those things and you did work harder on yourself and you worked out or whatever, then rather than think about why that happened, just repeat that day.
Yeah.
And you think about it in the context of working out. It's so true, isn't it? It's that, rather than try and work out at 6 a.m. because that's what working out people do, or that's what motivated people do, find what works for you. And, keep trying lots of different things. Keep trying lots of different, experiment. And when you find something that works, just keep repeating that, hold that, because it could be a lot of input factors which you can't control, but try and model that and repeat it. If that makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it goes beyond physical activity. It goes the same for learning, right? If you hate reading, then don't go and start reading books, but go for audiobooks or buy online courses or find another way to learn something, right? And find the time to do it. Listen to podcasts. You can do that in your commute, right? Instead of the news, which is is mostly negative. Put on a podcast or put on an audiobook and make the time there. Be creative in doing these things at the time that it suits you. I remember a mutual friend of Graham and I started changing what he listens to in the commute in the tube to his work. And instead of doing his emails, he was now starting to listen to podcasts, to books, and it's a much more positive way to use your time in the subway or in the tube. There are ways to do it, but you have to get creative and you just have to make the time for it, I think.
Yeah, and experiment.
Definitely. Yeah.
Because what works for you and what works for me might not necessarily work for you as the listener, right?
A good example, I think, is that especially in my generation, everybody wants to run a marathon, right?
Right.
And I sort of started thinking about, I might want to run a marathon, but my body just is not suited for running. And I get, back problems and it's just not. And then I thought, okay, well, maybe the goal for me here is not to run the marathon. The goal here for me is to have energy and to be healthy. So that can be done in many ways. It can be done by swimming. It can be done by biking. It can be done by being on a treadmill, but then you walk with an incline. There's different ways that are a lot less impact, have a lot less impact on my back, which I can do cardio exercise. So you got to just move around, I think, some things and just find out what works, like you said.
Can I give you an example, which I don't know if it's reading too much into the situation, but it's quite funny.
Go for it.
I think that there's a more of a profound message in it. Maybe we can dig it out a little bit. Okay, so like going to the supermarket and buying food.
Yes.
And I literally only just realized this a couple of weeks ago. And I'm 45 years old, so it's taken me this long to work this out, right? I go to the supermarket and I buy food. And normally I buy food with my family, but the last few weeks I've been traveling on my own.
Yep.
Go to the supermarket, buy food. And the first thing you do when you walk into a supermarket is usually you walk through the vegetable aisle where it's all laid out for you. And they're just kind of into buying mode, right? Okay, so I have to get vegetables. So what do I buy? I buy what I've always bought, which is what everybody else buys. I buy mushrooms and I buy cabbage and I buy blah, blah, blah. I go through the list, right?
Yep.
And only just a couple of weeks ago, I realized, actually, why am I doing this?
Yep.
Why am I, for example, I don't eat mushrooms. I buy them, but then I think, what can I do with these things, right?
Yeah.
Why do I have mushrooms? There's nothing, I don't have a use for these. Buying them.
Yeah.
Right. And then I realized, actually, why don't you just buy one vegetable and just repeat that? So I thought, well, actually, I'll just buy broccoli florets, right? Broccoli spit, and I'll just buy those, and I'll just repeat that. So I'll buy 3 of those, right? So the point I'm trying to get to is, it's, we kind of think that, all these things that people do, we should absorb all of that. Like, okay, so he reads and he listens to podcasts and he watches this and he goes to these events and so on. But just, if you can settle, it's the whole idea of working harder on yourself. If you can just settle on one thing that works really well for you, double down on that.
Yeah.
Because don't struggle with the stuff that doesn't work for you. Because it could be as simple as like buying the mushrooms. Maybe that doesn't work for you. Just double down on what does work for you, because you'll be so much happier. And it's so much easier to manage.
Yeah, I do the same. I mean, if I'm at home, which is usually, unless I'm out of the house for work, but if I'm at home, I always eat a salad. And the salad is always the same. because I know that's the one time in the day that I need to eat something that is slow, high, how you call it, low glycemic index. So it takes a while for it to digest. Yeah. And I need one point in my day where I need to make sure that I eat healthy stuff only. So that's usually the lunch, and it's always the same. And I never have to think what goes in it because I always have the same thing in it. So every once in a while there's some fruit or something else, but that works for me, and I feel good. I feel healthy. Right now I'm not hungry. It's 4 p.m. So that's what I need to achieve, right? So if that works, just keep doing that. And then in the weekend, I eat whatever everybody else is eating, or we go out or whatever, right? But at least I know there's 5 days in a week that I usually eat healthy stuff in the morning and in the afternoon. And then at dinner, I eat whatever we have together. But you're right.
You make a good point about not thinking about it. That was key, isn't it?
Yeah. It's just, I know what's in the fridge. I know what I'm going to eat. I know what I need to buy for it. So it's always the same. And it makes it easier. And I think that's the other thing, right? If you make it simple, or if you dumb down the decisions you have to make, you're more likely to go and follow through and do it, right? Eat healthy.
Because then it doesn't become a decision. It becomes just a habit, doesn't it? I mean, if you have to decide, I have to eat healthy, what do I do? Yeah. Do I have this or do I have that, right? Then it becomes, it's like working out, isn't it? It's like, do I go to the gym or do I go for a run?
Exactly. And the other simple thing is, like, for instance, drinking water, right? If you have problems and you don't drink enough water, and 90% of the people doesn't drink enough water, just buy a huge, big jar that has like 3 liters of water in it. You put it on your desk and finish it in a day.
Because it'll just be there, won't it? It'll just be
It's really simple.
So true.
Yeah.
It's so true.
But dumb it down.
Exactly. It goes back to that point about working harder on yourself, isn't it? It's that, it has to be something that, it's like President Obama, isn't it? Just choosing 2 boiled eggs. It has to be a no-brainer.
Yeah.
It just has to be there.
Yeah.
Right. Rather than, if you start, it's like, I mean, even in the context of physical exercise, right? If it's right there on your doorstep, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
But if you have to drive 30 minutes to the gym, maybe that's going to happen for the first couple of weeks. But then, maybe I'll do the gym every other day, or maybe I'll do the gym on Saturday because, I've got to do this, or I've got to fix the car or whatever. All these kind of things get in the way.
Yeah, you got to set yourself up for success. You got to make it very likely that you're going to do what you're planning to do. So I think on that note, work harder on yourself than you work on your job. We've gone a little bit long today, but we had lots of different angles to look at this. Go to lazymoneymachine.com. Find out what we're doing there. Follow our free 5-series mini course if you want to learn a bit more about what we're doing. And we'll see you in the next episode of the Lazy Money Machine podcast.